Hey, what is up, mortals? It is Ellen here with a new video for you. Welcome to the 5th part of What If Deku Had the Rinnegan. I just wanted to greet you guys by saying sit back and relax. You're in for a treat. So, we begin. Walking into the exam area felt like the crystallization of a dream he'd been too afraid to put into words. The echoes of his steps as he walked down the corridor into the exit, heart pounding in his ears and eyes burning with excitement, was like carefully picking each of his fantasies as a child and making them into reality.
It's time for the trial of battle!
All Might's voice boomed throughout the area. He felt, rather than saw, everyone tense up and shiver in excitement. Izuku could relate. Here they were, clad in their very first hero costumes, surrounded by their peers in what could very well be the next generation of heroes, about to be instructed by the greatest hero of all time in a test of power and skill. At least he was surrounded by friendly faces. As soon as he found her, Izuku immediately walked up to Uraraka. He'd wondered what her costume would look like. Oh. Ah, hey! The girl greeted him with a large smile, which Izuku tried to respond with one of his own. He ended up being considerably more shaky, though. Your costume looks so cool, Midoriya! Super practical! Looking down at himself, Izuku had to agree. His mom had done an amazing job with it, though he'd opted to use the belt, boots, and gloves sent in by the support department instead. It felt nice to wear a costume his mother had made him based on his sketches of a dream of his to represent her faith in that very said dream. It was a practical costume indeed. A thick dark gray jumpsuit with white lines that ended at the neck, worn under a dark cloak that he kept from flowing too much with the belt he wore over it. The many beige pouches on the belt contained an assortment of different metallic objects, from screws to shuriken to small metal balls that he could propel with his quirk. The dark boots and gloves were mainly meant to protect him from getting cut up, especially considering how often he'd found himself shredding his immediate surroundings. The cooler part of it all, though, was the headband. He wore it around his forehead just over his eyes to keep his hair from covering his sight too much. It also made Izuku feel a little bit cooler, like a ninja or something. He was rather fond of it. As for Uraraka-san, I'd wish I'd drawn my request sketch a little better, she admitted with an embarrassed laugh. It came out a little tighter than I intended. I think you look really cool. Izuku tried, making an active effort not to stare. Everyone did. Well, almost everyone. Izuku had to admit that Minoru Minetta's choice of a costume was a bit on the weird side. It looked like he had a diaper on, but Izuku wasn't about to say that to him. For example, the boy in the medieval-like armor looked really cool. So did Kacchan, though the grenades in his arms were admittedly a bit too on the nose. It fit Bakugou, if nothing else. Subtlety was not and would never be his forte.
Sensei!
The armored boy, whose voice he recognized as Ida's, called out.
This is the fake city from the entrance exams. Is this where our trial will be held? You'll see,
All Might responded, the same smile on his face as always.
In fact, take a few steps and you'll be there. This shall be an indoor battle trial.
Izuku paused. Bakugou fighting indoors. Hell, him fighting indoors, what with the Shinra Tensei and all. Oh no. The test itself ended up being pretty simple. Surprisingly so, even. They were split into teams of 2, which would then be assigned battles with another team, in which one would play the role of the villain and the other the role of the hero. Each team was given some capture tape to use on the enemy team, which would constitute a win on their side, but the main objective was something else. The heroes had to capture the bomb, while the villains had to protect it for the full duration of the trial. That was all well and good. Plus, the good news were, Izuku's pair ended up being Uraraka. Having friends was really something else. Well, he said that, but, well, bad news is, their opponents, assigned to be the villains, were Ida-kun, another friend, and Bakugou, who was, well, Bakugou. The two had gone into the building some 2 minutes ago, meaning Izuku and Uraraka had 3 minutes more to prepare and commit the building's layout to memory. At least there aren't any punishments like with Aizawa-sensei, Uraraka mused. All Might really is nice. Yeah, Izuku agreed, but his mind was admittedly elsewhere. Pacing and mumbling in circles, the boy tried desperately to keep his cool. Think, Izuku, think! He didn't have too long to hatch a plan. So, Izuku inhaled. Exhaled. That's it. That's it! Uraraka-san? Yeah? She asked, tilting her head. I've got a plan. It'll sound weird, but listen to me. The silence inside the building was absolutely haunting. In fact, Izuku could hear absolutely nothing but the sounds of his own footsteps, boots clicking against cold concrete, and breathing echoing aimlessly across the walls of each corridor he traversed. With the concentric eyes of the Rinnegan narrowing as he walked, searching for even a clue of Bakugou's presence, Izuku took in a deep breath. Bakugou would come for him, was likely hunting him down right then even. Katsuki was neither dumb or oblivious, but he was just arrogant enough to believe himself capable of taking out anyone he had to, especially the one he'd so gently named a damn nerd. And sure, maybe it sounded arrogant, but Izuku knew for a fact he could take Bakugou. As things were, he had just about every possible advantage. He was more powerful, wasn't as angry, knew what to expect, had more information, the list went on. But he wasn't about to underestimate Bakugou. So he kept walking, and listening closely. Until he heard it, the distant sound of a footstep. Someone breathing. It was a faint sound, one he'd probably have missed if he wasn't looking for it. And then, Uraraka-san, run! Izuku screamed, jumping backwards in just the right way to be right beside a staircase. Found you, bastard! Bakugou shouted, a wild, triumphant grin on his lips as he rocketed himself into view from the congruent hallway, crimson eyes burning with rage. Boom! The deafening explosion that ensued was of such intensity that Izuku's ears were ringing for an hour afterward. He'd only barely avoided the brutal blow, watching instead as an entire section of the wall was pulverized in his place. Izuku skidded backwards and stopped, raising his fists as Bakugou finally landed and turned to him, looking somewhere between giddy and murderous. Damn it, you nerd, don't dodge! He spoke, sounding just as pissed as he looked. And don't think you can save your little girlfriend either! Katsuki was neither dumb nor oblivious, but he was rash. Rash enough, for example, to take Izuku on his word that Uraraka was ever there to begin with. She wasn't. So Izuku grinned back, trembling. I didn't, he replied. You just missed. He'd not thought it was possible, but Bakugou was even angrier after that. Oh, is that so? Yeah, definitely angrier. Bakugou would never grin like that otherwise. A pause. They sized each other up, their stances, their gazes. Everything was considered. Bakugou's hands flexed. Izuku's trembled. A bead of sweat traveled down the greenhead's face. It fell to the floor, and they both sprung into action. It was a bit interesting to see how consistent Bakugou was. His stance, Izuku knew, was perfect. After using twin explosions to push himself forward like a cannonball, faster than most could keep up with, he twisted his body to lead with a right hook that could, if unblocked, probably knock someone out. Consistent because Bakugou always led with a right hook. Unfortunately for Izuku, blocking such a strike was amazingly difficult. He could try and judo flip the boy, but that would also put him in range of a possible explosion. Fortunately for Izuku, he did not need to. So, he answered with a strike of his own, coming from below like an uppercut, but with an open hand instead. The Rinnegan flared to life with coursing chakra. The air around his hand was distorted by sudden pressure. And Bakugou was met with a forceful push of gravity far beyond what he'd been prepared for, the air knocked out of his lungs in an instant. Diva Path! The sound of concrete being violently shattered was no explosion, but that didn't make it any less explosive in its own way. Or deafening, in fact. And now, a word from our gracious sponsor for this video, Honey. Honey is a free browser add-on available on Google, Opera, Firefox, Safari. If it's a browser, it has Honey. Honey automatically saves you money when you check out on sites like Amazon, Papa John's, Kohl's. Wherever you shop, it's a good chance that Honey can save you money. All you have to do is, when you're checking out at these major sites, click that little orange button and it will scan the entire internet and find discount codes for you. It takes 2 clicks to install Honey. Now, anytime you check out, Honey will scan the entire internet and find coupon codes for you. If there is a coupon code, they will find it. And if there's not a coupon code, you can rest assured that you are getting the best price possible, and there literally is not one available on the internet. If you install Honey right now, you can save like $50 to $100 on your shopping doing nothing. There's literally no reason not to install Honey. It takes 2 clicks. 10 million people use it, 100,000 5-star reviews. Unless you hate money, you should install Honey. Yikes, one Kaminari Denki muttered, wincing unconsciously as the footage from the battle played out in front of their eyes. Bakugou's a jerk, but man, that must have hurt! Though he remained silent, All Might could not help but agree. That had been rather forceful. Granted, young Bakugou seemed both aggressive and rather intent on fighting young Midoriya, but there was something to be said about learning restraint. In a way, All Might supposed it made sense. Having been present on the day young Midoriya learned of his potential, he had already expected the boy to struggle with some control over the destructive force he was able to emit. And while the green-haired boy had clearly practiced with his control, being able to effortlessly wield his abilities without overblowing them like he'd done twice before, it was clear that, due to the lateness of his experience, he'd not yet learned a lesson many quirked children learned from a young age. Restraint. Perhaps, he mused, the boy had taken inspiration from Bakugou. The two clearly knew one another. It would not surprise the number one hero if young Midoriya turned out to be emulating Bakugou's reckless abandon with his own quirk, perceiving it as the pinnacle of experience. That, he supposed, would have to be worked on in time. For now, All Might would watch. Something was up. He could tell as much. Something in young Midoriya's eyes told him the boy had a plan. So he would watch. Watch and hope nobody went overboard. As the dust settled, Izuku watched Katsuki's fallen form rise from amidst the dust and debris. He was injured, that much was certain. The forceful impact against the concrete had done Bakugou no favors, but the blonde, as always, remained steadfast in the face of danger, once again rising to face a challenge he thought he would surely beat down. Izuku respected that determination. But it would do Bakugou no favors this time. With a hand on his waist ready to grab the capture tape, Izuku took slow, measured steps toward Bakugou. Give... This wouldn't work if he sounded nervous. Give up, Kacchan! You really can't beat me! Bakugou's eyes narrowed, and small explosions popped in his hands as they tensed, flexing just slightly as he finally stood up. Give up? The boy repeated, slowly, carefully. The words seemed to enrage him. Good. You've always done this shit! Even though I always beat you! Even though I was always better than you! You keep looking down on me with your damn freaky eyes! Looking down? Izuku could not help but pause at that. Was that really what he thought? After Izuku had spent his whole life looking up at Bakugou, despite the boy's harsh treatment of him, the blonde stared him down in anger and claimed he'd always looked down on him. That's... His lips pursed. That's not fair. So what? Keep talking, Izuku. You need him angry. Give Uraraka time. What are you going to do about it, Kacchan? Yeah, that was the straw that broke the camel's back, because Bakugou chuckled. Chuckled and aimed his gauntlet at Izuku. You know, the support department here in UA is really something, he spoke. They actually designed the gauntlets exactly as I wanted them, as a container for my sweat. And right now, they're about half full. Ah, so that's why they looked like grenades. They essentially were grenades. With that much nitroglycerin, the size of Bakugou's explosion would be... Izuku swallowed dryly. Almost. Thumped his boot against the ground, taking a small step back. Thump. Something reverberated against the ground. Izuku prepared himself. Let's see you look down on me after this! Now! Shinra Tensei! The concrete under their feet was pulverized. Unlike the normal Diva Path techniques, Shinra Tensei was a sphere, a dome of repulsive force that struck equally on every possible side. Being able to control the radius of the sphere, Izuku was more than able to make sure it ended just in front of Bakugou's feet, pushing the tip of his boots back, but not more than that. Dust and debris rose into the air like flames. Suddenly struggling to remain afoot, Izuku and Bakugou both stumbled backwards. Though, unlike Izuku, who was falling to the floor below theirs, Bakugou had solid ground to fall on. Unfortunately for the blonde, though, the hole wasn't supposed to be an exit. It was an entrance. And a triumphant Uraraka, having made herself weightless and prepared for the signal, which had come. Gotcha! The girl's smile was 1,000-watt wide as she tied the capture tape around Bakugou's ankle. Taking on Ida after that was easier than it should have, even with the time constraints. Though the boy was very, very determined and dedicated to his role, a 2-on-1 was a little beyond his abilities. In the end, Izuku had chosen to receive a very, very forceful kick to the cheek in order to push Ida into the ceiling, allowing Uraraka to capture the bomb. A good strategy, aside from the broken and bloody tooth he'd ended up spitting out, much to Ida's horror. That would have been funny if it didn't hurt so much. He refused to look at Bakugou as he walked out, though, too confused by his own emotions to stare the boy in the face. Bakugou hadn't been ready for defeat, but he'd been even less ready to be defeated by a trick, of all things. He was silent, though. Absolutely and completely silent. And that was the worst part of it all.
So,
All Might's voice boomed.
Can anyone here tell me who was the MVP in the amazing battle we just witnessed?
It's gotta be Midoriya, right? He kicked Bakugou's ass and then dealt with Ida, so... I believe, Yayorozu Momo interjected, that the MVP of this match was Uraraka. Though Midoriya was certainly competent and flawlessly played his role in the plans they developed, he consistently put himself at harm's way throughout the fight in instances where fighting alongside his teammate could be preferable. Furthermore, Uraraka was the one who accomplished both objectives in the way, which is not to say that Midoriya did not play his part, of course. All Might hummed, stroking his chin as if deep in thought.
Yes, you are correct!
From his seat beside Uraraka and Ida, holding an ice pack to his cheek while he waited for the end of the analysis before heading off to see Recovery Girl, Izuku couldn't help but agree. The plan might have been his, but he'd be lying if he said he didn't get a bit caught up in the moment during the battle. Still, for a moment there, after the battle but before the fight, when All Might had looked at Izuku and smiled, a proud smile, as if Izuku had pleasantly surprised him. And that was more than enough for him. Thank you all for sticking around, and I hope that you enjoyed. Before you leave, we would like to let you know that We the Celestials has many other channels for your entertainment and viewing purposes. All the information you'll need is right below here in the description, so feel free to check out all the other incredible projects our team creates. Secondly, on behalf of We the Celestials, I'd like to thank everyone involved in the production of today's awesome content. Their details will be in the description below. That's all for today's video, so goodbye and have a divine day.